Lord, we're longing for your glory. We're looking for you now. Oh, that you would rend the heavens and come down. And underneath the shelter, in the shadow of your wings, our eyes at last will look upon our King. The fire of your coming, the glory of your presence will shake the earth, and every heart will know you are Messiah, Yeshua HaMashiach, Lion of Judah, the God of Israel, defender of Zion, the glory of your people, the King of all the earth, the King of all the earth. The rulers of the nations will tremble at your voice, at the fire of your glory coming down. And you will shake the mountains, all the kingdoms of this world, and every knee will bow before you, Lord. The fire of your coming, the glory of your presence will change the earth, and every heart will cry, oh, you are Messiah, Yeshua HaMashiach, Lion of Judah, the God of Israel. You're defender of Zion, the glory of your people, the King of all the earth. Oh, you are Messiah, Yeshua HaMashiach. You're the Lion of Judah, the God of Israel, defender of Zion, the glory of your people, the King of all the earth. You are Messiah, Yeshua HaMashiach, Lion of Judah, the God of Israel. Oh, defender of Zion, the glory of your people, the King of all the earth. You're the King of all. You're the King. You're the
This Shabbat is Toldot Generations and opens in the book of Genesis, chapter 25, verse 19, with the birthing of Esau and Jacob, the two nations warring in Riďqah's womb. Today, we will look at not only the birthing of Esau and Jacob, Israel, but the end time prophecies relating to their generations. Isaac spoke prophetic words over both his sons, but I'd like to focus on the words spoken over Esau in Genesis 27, verse 40. We read, and by your sword," speaking to Esau, "you are to live and serve your brother," meaning Jacob, Israel. "And it shall be when you grow restless that you shall break his yoke from your neck." In the end of days, there will be a season of time when Esau will break the yoke of his brother Israel from his neck. This will be Israel's time of trouble that leads into Israel's greater trouble, known as the 3.5 years of the Great Tribulation. For Esau to break the yoke of his brother off his neck would require usurping the identity, the very identity of his brother Jacob, who was later named Israel, and thus feign claim to the birthright he previously sold for a pot of red stew. This would be a long-term generational strategy requiring many unholy confederacies and alliances. Genesis 25:19, and this is the genealogy of Isaac, Abraham's son. Abram brought forth Isaac, and Isaac was 40 years old when he took Riďqah as wife, the daughter of Bethuel, the Aramean of Padan Aram, the sister of Laban, the Aramean. And Isaac prayed to Yahweh for his wife because she was barren, and Yahweh answered his prayer, and Riďqah, his wife, conceived. And within her, the children struggled together. And she said, "If all is right, why am I this way?" So she went to ask Yahweh. And Yahweh said to her, two nations are in your womb, and 2 peoples shall be separated from your body. And one people shall be stronger than the other, and the older serve the younger. And when the days were filled for her to give birth, and see, twins were in her womb. We will see through jealousy, envy, and strife, Esau's generations would succumb to a darker power. This dark power is the head of the Ephesians 6 army of principalities, powers, rulers of darkness, and spiritual wickedness in heavenly places, and thrives on functioning under and perfecting the dark craft of identity theft by even declaring himself as Elohim. This strong man seducing power has always been willing to purchase souls, desiring to join his fallen forces to kill, to steal, and to destroy for earthly power, prestige, and money. But in this arena of darkness, one must remember there is no honor among thieves. In Genesis 25:25 through 28, and the first came out red all over, like a hairy garment, so they called his name Esau. And afterward, his brother came out with his hand holding on to Esau's heel, so his name was called Jacob. And Isaac was 60 years old when she bore them. And the boys grew up, and Esau became a man knowing how to hunt, a man of the field, while Jacob was a complete man, dwelling in tents. And Isaac loved Esau because he ate of his wild game, but Riďqah loved Jacob. Isn't it interesting that in Genesis 25, verse 28, we read, and Isaac loved Esau because he ate of his wild game, but Riďqah loved Jacob. Isaac apparently loved Esau for satisfying his earthly physical appetite for wild game. So what was Riďqah's reason for favoring Jacob over Esau? Could it be that she clung to the prophetic words issued to her by Yahweh in Genesis 25:23? And Yahweh said to her, 2 nations are in your womb, and 2 peoples shall be separated from your body, and 1 people shall be stronger than the other, and the older serve the younger. From these 2 scriptural verses, it appears that Riďqah's reason for favoring Jacob was highly superior to Isaac's reasoning for favoring Esau for the wild game. Esau's fatal error in Genesis 25:29 through verse 34. And Jacob cooked a stew, and Esau came in from the field, and he was weary. And Esau said to Yaakov, "Please feed me with that same red stew, for I am weary." That is why his name was called Edom. But Jacob said, "Sell me your birthright today." And Esau said, "Look, I am going to die, so why should I have birthright?" Then Jacob said, "Swear to me today." And he swore to him and sold. He chose to sell his birthright to Jacob. Jacob then gave Esau bread and stew of lentils, and he ate and drank and rose up and left. Thus Esau despised his birthright. This became a big problem for Esau. He had sold his birthright. He had sold his birthright for earthly food. Apparently, the love of earthly food was a personality trait of both Esau and his father Isaac. The only way Esau could perceive getting his birthright back would be to assume the identity of his brother. This would not be easy. Matter of fact, it would be a long, tedious process that would transcend Toldot Generations. He would need help to achieve such a monumental strategy. It would require a magnitude of unholy alliances and confederacies throughout the generations. To understand where Esau was headed, we must remember the prophetic words spoken over Esau by his father Isaac in Genesis 27:38 through 40. So let's review that again. And Esau said to his father, "Have you only one blessing, my father? Bless me too, O my father." And Esau lifted up his voice and wept. And Isaac, his father, answered and said to him, "See, your dwelling is of the fatness of the earth and of the dew of the heavens from above. And by your sword you are to live and serve your brother. And it shall be, when you grow restless, that you shall break his yoke from your neck." Esau goes the way of the world as he became further and further enveloped into darkness. This was a secret scheming world that exists even to this day in many shapes, forms, and under many titles, woven into a web of generational darkness. Esau uses his initial servant position to Jacob as a hidden technique, right? Aren't servants usually in the background? So Esau uses his initial servant position to Jacob as a hidden technique to weave his way into the strike zone of Israel by making Jacob Israel reliant on himself instead of Elohim. This kind of power prides itself on the color red, blood red. Those that resist the overall plan are either taken out, marginalized, censored, or defamed. Esau's name would end up traveling further than he ever would and became synonymous with Edom, Edomites, and Mount Seir. Other secular names that joined such confederacies of darkness would also achieve various levels of power associated with their names that would also travel further than they would ever dream. Obedience would achieve higher ranks for those willing to encircle and isolate the true sheep of Israel, giving those who are wolves in sheep's clothing a false sense of power and superiority. What was overlooked, however, was that the breaker, Yahushua HaMashiach, who trumps all principalities and powers, can and will break through all barriers, imprisoning his sheep, his people. Now, I'd like to share this clip that Sabina shared with me just this morning. And I believe it's a perfect introduction to what we will be viewing today.
And if I go to sensitive history, well, then I must quote sources that say it rather than that I say it. This is a fascinating book, and the web pages are there. You can check it out. Facts are facts. This is a book that was written by a Jewish man. And he confronted the thinking of many of the high-placed individuals of the world. This is interesting stuff. In this book, Benjamin H. Friedman, a Jewish man, writes about the Jews and reveals an interesting history. He states that the present Jews in Palestine are not the true descendants of the Judeans, but rather descendants of the Khazars. In the letter addressed to D. David Goldstein of Boston, Massachusetts, a convert to Catholicism, the author, Benjamin Friedman of New York City, dated October 1954, provides some fascinating insights. This is in the public domain. Let's study this for a while and see where we get. Benjamin H. Friedman claims that the word Jew was only introduced into the English language in the 18th century, and that Jesus referred to himself as a Judean and not as a Jew. Inscribed upon the cross when Jesus was crucified were the Latin words Iesus Nazarenus Rex Iodeorum, which means Jesus of Nazareth, ruler of the Judeans. Now, this is fascinating. I went and checked it, and it is so. Yes, it happens to be so. Now, the word Jew today has a religious as well as a political connotation. You think of a Jewish entity, a government, but you also think of their religion incorporated at the same time, whereas the term Judean is a geographic connotation. It's a geographic. It doesn't incorporate the religion. It's where he came from. He was from Judah. He was a Judean. He further writes, the form of religious worship known as Pharisaism in Judea in the time of Jesus was a religious practice based exclusively upon the Talmud. The Talmud in the time of Jesus was the Magna Carta, the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, all rolled into one, of those who practiced Pharisaism. The Talmud today occupies the same relative position with respect to those who profess Judaism. So the rituals and rites that many of them observed were based on the Talmud and not on the Torah. Rabbi Morris, this is all from the source. Rabbi Morris in Kurtzer wrote a most revealing and comprehensive article with the title, What is a Jew?, which was published as a feature article in Look magazine in June 17, 1952 issue. In that article, Rabbi Morris Kurtzer evaluated the significance of the Talmud to Judaism today. In that illuminating treatise and that important subject, by the most qualified authority at the time, Rabbi Morris N. Kurtzer stated, the Talmud consists of 63 books of legal, ethical, and historical writings of the ancient rabbis. It was edited 5 centuries after the birth of Jesus. It is a compendium of law and lore. It is the legal code which forms the basis of the Jewish religious law, and it is, note, the textbook used in the training of rabbis. So rabbis are trained according to the Talmud, and the Talmud has very little in common with the Bible. Then he states, from the birth of Jesus until this day, there have never been recorded more vicious and vile, libelous blasphemies of Jesus or Christians and the Christian faith by anyone, anywhere, or any time than you will find between the covers of the infamous 63 books, which are the legal code which forms the basis of the Jewish religious law, as well as the textbook used in the training of rabbis. I don't want to go into it. If I were to put the quotes on the screen, which the Talmud contains about Jesus, you would be horrified. It is some of the vilest statements that I have ever had the dishonor of reading. And this is what their training consists of. He then proceeds to quote some of the most horrendous statements from the Talmud regarding ethical issues, and not only regarding ethical issues, which deal with many, many issues from economics to relations with women, etc., and of course, the view on Christ. As to the origin of the present Jews in Palestine, he states that those Jews derived from Eastern Europe, and many, many of the Jews that today live in the reconstituted state of Israel come from Eastern Europe, are not descendants of the Judeans or the lost tribes of Israel, but rather descendants of the Khazars. Who were they? They were a nation most people do not even know of. He writes, the so-called self-styled Jews in Eastern Europe in modern history cannot legitimately point to a single ancient ancestor who ever set even a foot on the soil of Palestine in the era of Bible history. Research also revealed that the so-called or self-styled Jews in Eastern Europe were never Semites, are not Semites now, nor can they ever be regarded as Semites at any future time by any stretch of the imagination. What secret, mysterious power has been able for countless generations to keep the origin and the history of the Khazars and the Khazar kingdom out of the history textbooks? Did you ever learn about it at school? I never learned about it. And out of classroom courses in history throughout the world, the origin and the history of Khazars and the Khazar kingdom are certainly incontestable historical facts. You have to do some cross-checking. Even the Jewish Encyclopedia is quite explicit about it. This was the Khazar kingdom. Here is the Black Sea, the Byzantine Empire. Here was Persia. And here was the kingdom of the Khazars. It was a massive kingdom. Now let's look at some of this interesting history. The Khazars were an Asiatic nation. And the Jewish Encyclopedia states Persian origin that converted to Talmudic Judaism. Now, obviously, some of the rabbis involved there could have been Judeans and probably were Judean descendants, but their converts are not Judeans. And that had conquered a vast area of Eastern Europe, which was in turn later conquered by the Russians in the 10th and 13th century. So that is why there are so many Russian Jews. Have you ever thought where they came from? Did they escape from Palestine? Were they the lost 10 tribes? Did they immigrate to Russia? No. This is a totally different nation that accepted Talmudic Judaism. He writes, after a historic session with representatives of the three monotheistic religions, King Bulan, 7th century, decided against Christian and Islam, because Islam had just arisen, and selected as the future state religion the religious worship then known as Talmudism, and not known and practiced as Judaism, which was totally different, which was based on the Bible. They adopted the Hebrew alphabet, and the Khazars adapted words to their requirements from the German, the Slavonic, and the Baltic languages. This language was known as Yiddish. And Yiddish used the Hebrew alphabetic characters, but not Hebrew. It's not Hebrew. It's Yiddish. I've always wondered, when I hear them speaking Yiddish, I understand quite a few words. Why? Because I'm German. They had many exchanges with universities and their students were trained. So here is another nation which had occupied this area, and they had adopted this religion and brought rabbis in and trained the people, but they were not Judean. Now let's jump to today. In accordance to this history, the religion of the modern state of Israel is based on Kabbalistic and Talmudic traditions and is far removed from the biblical worship of Yahweh. And if it is based on the Talmud, it is so anti-Jesus Christ that it belies understanding. And here we have, in March 2006, while visiting Yeshiva University at Brooklyn, New York, a Jewish institute dedicated to the study of the what? Talmud. We have Cardinal Casper. Who's Cardinal Casper? Cardinal Casper is the cardinal associated with ecumenism. They are honoring the Talmud together. You see, behind the scenes, there is a pact. Because I, as a Christian, can sympathize with every other religion, but I cannot embrace a religion that speaks evil of Jesus Christ. Nor can I have a union with such a religion. Because can two walk together lest they be agreed? Now let's get back to the Napoleonic society and see what happened further. Napoleon established both the Bank of France, we saw that, the French Bourse, the stock exchange, as well as the National Department of Tax Boards. Do we have all of those systems of governments in the world today, yes or no? Yes, we do. And we have the same system of economics today, yes or no? Yes. The world is run by the stock exchange. To ensure equitable taxation for all, consequently, the income of the French peasants skyrocketed. Think tanks and research centers were established in France to work on projects vital for national economy. So a totally new economic order evolved. Who started these organizations? We will have to see. Who runs the secret societies today and the secret organizations? Who started them? Who is the instigator? Who's the boss behind the scenes? We will have to see. And maybe we'll get a different picture of what's happening in the world. An industrial board was organized to provide data and information to French industry, as exemplified by the success of the sugar beet farming and the canning industry. In the military, Napoleon pioneered in what we describe today as the principles of war. And did you know that these principles, the armies of today, are based on the organization created by Napoleon for his Grand Army, and it has been used ever since. Who controls these armies? Who controls the war machines of the world? Who controls the gun running? These are important questions. And now it gets interesting. Napoleon disappears. He says, I want a Jewish state. I want to rebuild the Jewish temple. What is he planting in the minds? An idea. He starts the lodges. The British lodges start taking over these lodges eventually. Of course, they're all integrated. And then Prussia, when Napoleon is gone, retracted the liberal laws in 1815 after the Battle of Waterloo. The worst setback was inflicted upon the Jews of the Papal States. It would almost seem as if Pius VII had taken revenge on the Jewish population of his territory for the humiliation he had suffered at the hand of Napoleon. He was not content with their confinement behind the walls of the re-erected ghetto, but he obliged the Jews to wear the yellow badge. The Jews had to walk with a badge, with an armband. Does that ring a bell somewhere? In Sardinia, the Jews were thrown back into ghettos and not allowed to build synagogues. Much later, some European nations assimilated the Jews between 1824 and 1867, in Holland in 1830. These are Protestant nations. They don't understand what's going on. They're trying to help the Jews. Sweden, 1834, Switzerland, 1838. It is remarkable that in England, it was only in 1858, after Lord Lionel Rothschild was elected 5 times, that he was permitted to take his seat in Parliament. It is also interesting to know that the laws that were passed in France in 1808 are still in existence even to this day. So there was liberty on the one hand, but oppression started to take over in Europe. And by the time we get to Adolf Hitler, did he introduce the same oppression, yes or no? Yes, he hounded them. He disenfranchised them. And the Russians, all of these nations, suddenly the world was in turmoil, in war, and the Jews were the hounded ones. And at the end of this war, where would those poor Jews go when they tried to escape the turmoil of Europe? Where did they go? They were herded like sheep to a new Jewish state in order to create a new philosophy which was to be swallowed hook, line, and sinker by a world with a totally new religious philosophy, no longer based on Protestantism, but now based on new Catholic counter-theology. Have you ever thought about it? That the British, who were the saviors of Europe, allowed ships to be filled with Jewish hopefuls who wanted to emigrate to the West, how they wouldn't let those ships pass by, and how eventually they were all herded towards Palestine, and the Jews had to settle in a land that had nothing. Well, it's interesting. You have to create a national identity. You have to create national heroes. And we dealt with that in previous lectures. I don't want to go into it. And eventually, where did they end up? They ended up the leaders of the nations. And a new nationality arose, and a new nationalistic, Zionistic pride arose, and a nation arose. I feel sorry for them. They have been hounded and herded. It is unbelievable. And this man was the lackey of his Pope. And I'm not going to deal with that. And this man was maybe the same lackey, sitting at the table, behind the scenes. Revelation chapter 11:9, and they of the people and the kindred and tongues and nations shall see the dead bodies 3 days and a half, and shall not suffer their dead bodies to be put in graves. The Bible was done away with. Secularism is going to rule the world for a time, until the time is right and ripe to introduce a new theistic era, And they that dwell upon the earth shall rejoice over them and make merry, and shall send gifts one to another, because these two prophets tormented them that dwelt upon the earth. And after 3 days and a half, the Spirit of life from God entered them, and they stood upon their feet, and great fear fell upon them which saw them. And they heard great voice from heaven saying unto them, Come up hither. And they ascended up to heaven in a cloud, and their enemies beheld them. And the same hour was there a great earthquake, and the 10th part of the city fell, and the earthquake was slain of men 7,000, and the remnant were affrighted and gave glory to the God of heaven. Will God stand by that the devil sets up a massive counterfeit system of religion, and a counterfeit system that should herd people like cattle through Hegelian dialectic into a collective mindset without giving a counter? Of course he won't. They will sweep away God's word, but God's word will be lifted up. They will rise, and the Bible societies are formed, and God's word becomes prominent, although they suppressed it. And will he not have a remnant that will say, this is what the word says, to counter that which is being set up as a massive counterfeit on this planet? I believe he will. So as the enemy musters his forces for the final onslaught, so God raises the tabernacle of his truth, and these two forces grow together until they will meet in the final conflict. But it is not a literal temple of stone that is involved, but a spiritual temple. God's people, based on the word, in conflict with the man of sin and his counterfeit. When Christ came the first time, he established his church, the spiritual temple, on the new cornerstone, and the wall of partition between Jew and Gentile was broken down. This new philosophy, this new religion, which literalizes the prophecies back to a literal Palestine, a literal Jewish state, are not based on the Bible. Amos 9:11, in that day will I raise up the tabernacle of David that is fallen, and close up the breaches thereof. This is what we're talking about in this series. We have to repair the breach. And I will raise up his ruins, and I will build it as in the days of old, that they may possess the remnant of Edom, and of all the heathen which are called by my name, says the Lord that doeth this. And the Apostle James applies this prophecy to the call of the Gentiles. Set up this tabernacle. Satan at the time of the end will set up a counterfeit to make it null and void, but God will raise up a remnant to stand against it.
Therefore, in essence, Esau slips into obscurity as he dilutes himself and intermingles with the world, the people, and the things of the world. He would present one face to Jacob, Israel, as his servant, yet mask his jealousy, envy, and strife as he transformed himself into a lethal predator, a camouflaged man-hunter. Hunting requires blending into the atmosphere around you. It requires silence, snares, and waiting for the opportune time to deliver the kill shot to break the yoke off his neck.
We are the generations of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And those generations, in spite of Esau, are being blessed. If you stay the course, you continue to press in, teach the word, encourage one another, and speak to the next generation that is raising up. Yes, we're going to need to make some adjustment and changes in how we live. Are we going to live like Esau, men of the field, out in the world, the field is the world? Or are we going to decide to live like Jacob and come into the tents and stay under the covering of Yahweh? Because the world is changing, but Yahweh is truly raising up another generation. I really do believe we're going to see many that will be crying the tears of Esau, the lost hope, when they awaken and realize that their generations have actually been stolen from them. Will it be too late? Well, it was too late for Esau, because Yahweh said that he loved Jacob, but he hated Esau. I think what we're seeing, brethren, today is a war between the seed lines. But Yahweh loves you, and he loves your generations. But you do, and I do, have a responsibility of where we're going to play. Are we going to play in the fields of the world, or are we going to come inside the tents of Jacob? Because that's the study halls of Shem. That's the place where the covering and the blessing is. Because your generations right now, they're under attack. They're under an outright assault. But Yahweh has a way for us to play, and that is in the kingdom way.
Esau's strategy for false restoration. What will this strategy look like? Usurp Jacob's identity as Israel. Stop up the wells of reproduction. Re-educate the masses to believe lies. Promote promiscuity. Reduce population. Legalize abortion, wars, unholy alliances, pit nations against nations, tamper with food, water, and air, create pandemics and pharmacia sorcery, addictions, and cause despair, censorship of truth, replace man with transhumanism, hack DNA, the software of life, create chaos through problem, reaction, and come up with their own solution. Create transgenders, sexual perversions. Infiltrate religions with false prophets. Unconventional warfare by obscuring prophecies, causing financial chaos, inflation, cause governmental dependency. And this is just a short list. The entanglement of the U.S. with the Middle East, Israel, is in full swing, which is heavily supported and integrated through false prophets promoting Christian Zionism and not biblical Zionism. With the return of Netanyahu, possibly coupled with Mr. T in 2024, could exponentially strengthen this deceptive path. True Israel are those born from above in Yahushua HaMashiach, whose names are registered in heaven. Esau's identity theft of the true Israel born from above is in full swing, and many are falling away and believing these lies, such as was displayed on TBN with John Hagee just 3 weeks ago. And this TBN YouTube channel has 176,000 views and has many followers. And they are constantly pumping in Christian Zionism. And they have at their disposal these false prophets that are propagating the lies. So people need to wake up and see through those lies. This dark generational seed would transcend the generations all the way back to Adam and Eve and before the foundation of the world and wreak havoc throughout time. To escape this matrix of darkness, Yahweh provided his generational seed of light and righteousness that would also transcend the generations all the way back to Adam and Eve and before the foundation of the world. This covenant of light and righteousness would be entered by faith and by being born anew into the one new man, Israel, born from above. This Israel is Yahweh's Melchizedek kingdom of priests from every tongue, tribe, people, and nation, and not the man-declared Israel created in 1948 in the Middle East. The war between the two seeds was made very evident through this Torah portion of Toldot Generations by the two nations warring in Riďqah's womb and extends all the way through the book of Revelation. Would Esau's strategy advanced by the ruler of darkness work? No. Esau and the Edomites ruling from Mount Seir would win some battles throughout history, but will ultimately lose the war. The prophetic word that Isaac spoke over Esau let us know that in the end of days, Esau would have a season when he would break the yoke of his brother Jacob Israel off his neck. The outcome to Esau's generations are later prophesied in the books of Isaiah, Obadiah, Joel, Daniel, John the Revelator, and many others. In Isaiah chapter 4, verse 2 through 5, we read, "In that day, the branch of Yahweh," speaking of Yahushua HaMashiach, "shall be splendid and esteemed, and the fruit of the earth shall be excellent and comely for the escaped ones of Israel. And it shall be that he who is left in Zion and he who remains in Jerusalem is called set apart, everyone who is written among the living in Jerusalem. When Yahweh has washed away the filth of the daughters of Zion and rinsed away the blood of Jerusalem from her midst by the spirit of judgment and by the spirit of burning, then Yahweh shall create above every dwelling place of Mount Zion and above her gatherings a cloud and smoke by day." Of course, that connects us back to the first Exodus, does it not? "And the shining of a flaming fire by night, for over all the esteemed shall be a covering." Again, connecting us back to the first Exodus, also connecting us back to Acts chapter 2, day of Pentecost, which is going to be again when he pours out his Ruach in greater measure. "And a booth for shade in the daytime from the heat, for a place of refuge, and for a shelter from storm and rain," because we are his witnesses. We are his witnesses. Ezekiel 36, "Thus said the Master Yahweh, once again I shall let the house of Israel inquire of me to do for them. I shall increase their men like a flock, as a set-apart flock, as the flock of Jerusalem at her appointed time. So shall the wasted cities be filled with flocks of men, and they shall know that I am Yahweh." Micah chapter 2, "I shall certainly gather all of you, O Jacob. I shall bring together the remnant of Israel. Put them together like sheep of the fold, like a flock in the midst of their pasture, they being noisy because of men. The breach maker, the breaker, Yahushua, shall go up before them. They shall break out and pass through the gate and go out by it. And their sovereign pass before them with Yahweh at their head." Presently, Israel, the remnant, born from above, are scattered on the 7 continents. That's where we are. That's where we are. And Yahweh shall put under the ban the tongue of the sea of Egypt, and he shall wave his hand over the river with the might of his spirit, and shall strike it into the 7 streams, and shall cause men to tread it in sandals. And there shall be a highway for the remnant of his people, those left from Asher, as it was for Israel in the day when he came up from the land of Egypt. The sheepfolds of Bozrah. Bozrah was a territory in Edomite country. Are we not all on the continents consisting of Edomites of this world, those that have not chosen to be born anew through Yahushua HaMashiach? That's all they have to do is repent and come to Yahushua. But if they choose not to, they remain in this fallen world. So we are all scattered across these 7 continents. We are Yahweh's sheep. And we have been strategically placed to one day be witnesses to those that have been deceived. And this world thinks it's trapped us. This world thinks it's a prison planet. They can't escape. We've got them pinned. But they do not. Because Yahweh is going to pour out his Ruach HaKodesh in the end of days. Once more, he will pour out his Ruach, and we will witness in a mighty, mighty way. And the breaker, Yahushua HaMashiach, will lead us out, as written in Ezekiel chapter 20, as a sweet fragrance. I shall accept you when I bring you out from the peoples, and I shall gather you out of the lands where you have been scattered, and I shall be set apart in you before the nations, and you shall know that I am Yahweh when I bring you into the land of Israel, into the land for which I lifted my hand in an oath to give to your fathers. So just as stated in Isaiah 4 verse 5, then Yahweh shall create above every dwelling place of Mount Zion and above her gatherings of her people a cloud and smoke by day, just like in the first Exodus, and the shining of a flaming fire by night. For over all the esteem shall be a covering, and a booth for shade in the daytime from the heat, for a place of refuge, and for a shelter from storm and rain. Now, I'd like us to listen to excerpts from Torah to the Tribes. Matthew Nolan does on Obadiah. He has a part 1 and part 2. These excerpts are taken from Obadiah part 2. So you can go to his YouTube channel or to his website to listen to part 1.
Let's turn to Obadiah. We looked at last week this great confederacy between the Edomites, and we established the Edomites made a confederacy. They came into the land and they took the identity of the Jews, and then later we saw in the teaching how this then was turned on their heads, and later in the beginning of the 20th century, again the Ashkenazi came in and took their identity as the Jews, and this is the duplicity that we see with Edom, and Edom's downfall is because of the confederacies and the alliances that they have made. That was Obadiah part 1. And now let's jump right into the text. We're in chapter 1. There's only one chapter, 13th verse though. Let's look at verse 13. You should not have entered into the gate of my people in the day of their calamity. Now remember, using the Torah as the foundational text, remember we saw that Jacob went and met his brother Esau. That was Jacob's trouble. That was his first trouble, which is a preliminary for Jacob's great trouble or his great tribulation. So Jacob had two tribulations. Jacob, Israel, has two tribulations, a lesser tribulation and then the great tribulation. And that's found in Jacob's life. When Jacob divided his house into two camps, that was his time of trouble. But when was Jacob's great tribulation? When his son Joseph's clothes were returned to him covered in animal blood. That was his great tribulation. So Israel, in the end of days, the teaching is that Israel is going to have a lesser tribulation called the time of Jacob's trouble, which is going to be when there's going to be much tumult and much trouble over and around the earth as a preliminary shake-up before the great tribulation. So, two tribulations, the time of Jacob's trouble and the time of the great tribulation. But here we see that there is this time of calamity. Yes, you should not have looked idly upon their affliction in the day of their calamity, nor have laid hands on their wealth in the day of their calamity. Verse 14. Neither should you have stood in the crossway to cut those of this that did escape. Neither should you have delivered up those of his that did remain in the day of distress. We talked about how this is really a trifold prophecy, beginning again when Edom made a confederacy, an alliance with the Babylonians at the time of the destruction of the first temple. Then secondly, we saw how the Edomites had infiltrated the hierarchy in Jerusalem at the time of the Roman occupation, and how this second part of the cycle was when the Romans came and sacked Jerusalem. The Edomites made a confederacy with them. Now what we're seeing is that we are living in this final day where we're seeing the confederacy of the Edomites, the Ashkenazi, already identified last week in chapter 1 of Obadiah, or I should say part 1 of Obadiah. We've now established that the Edomites are the Ashkenazi, the Sephardim, that have taken the identity of the Jews and have made alliances and confederacies with the nations, primarily the world orders or the banking finance cartels, particularly within the state of Israel, the Bank of England, Wall Street, and of course the European Union Bank. But we'll get into that a little bit more. But that confederacy is going to come toppling down and going to be exposed in this third and final cycle. And it will end with Israel being caught on fire, 2/3 going to destruction, 1/3 remaining, and then the flame of Joseph will return and lick up the remnants and take the land, because Joseph has always had the title deed to the land, because Israel, Jacob, gave his name not to Judah, but he placed his hands upon Ephraim and Manasseh, the sons of Joseph, and bestowed his name Israel. So anybody that tries to steal the name of Israel from the sons of Joseph is nothing more than a confederate apostate, imposter, if you will, and that's what we're dealing with today. So do not stand in the crossway, verse 14, because Edom stood in the crossway, whether it was with the Babylonians, whether it was with the Romans, or today with the hindrance of bringing the exiles back into the land. If you're a believer in Yahushua and you want to emigrate to Israel, no way, it's not going to happen unless you deny Messiah and you convert to Judaism. And many people are doing it. Many people are doing it. They will not allow regular immigration. They're standing in the way of the return of the 10 northern tribes, or the followers that have upheld the Messiah. So do not stand in the crossway. Edom stood in the crossway and tried to halt the migration, firstly, of the Jews, the true Jews that were trying to leave Jerusalem at the time of the Babylonian exile. And then later in the second cycle, they tried to halt the migration of the Jews as they were fleeing, as the Romans came down and destroyed the temple in 70 of the Common Era. Remember, there were two sects of Jews, authentic, real Jews that were in the land. There was the royal Negro class, which was the high class traveling merchant class that tried to escape and eventually went down to West Africa and established the kingdom of Judah. And then there was the poorer class, which were the fehalim, the Middle Eastern fehalim. Fehalim is a term that was coined by the historians David Ben-Gurion, who was the first prime minister of Israel, and the historian Ben-Zvi, who was the first president of Israel. They established, when they came into the land at the beginning of the 20th century, that the Arabs that were in the land, they were actually the real Jews that had remained in the land since 70, and they had become converted to Islam at the time of the Mohammedans because they couldn't afford to pay the jizya tax. They would have either lost the land, which they were totally dedicated to, this poor migrant class, or they had the choice of keeping the land and converting. Many did, but secretly believe in the Orthodox scriptures of the New Testament on pain of death. This is the reality. So everything that's up is down, what's black is white, and we've been served up a bunch of lies. But this has been exposed, but many people don't want to listen because it is politically incorrect when you've got such great financial funding of Zionism, Christian Zionism, and all of that. But reality strikes a hard chord to those of us that love the word. So again, we have to look at the whole context of this as Edom stood in the crossways, trying to prevent the migration of the true Jews, whether that was the royal Negro house of Judah or whether that was the migrant class of Fehalim. They still try to prevent their escape from Jerusalem, and the Fehalim have ended up remaining there under the Romans. Later they remained there under the Byzantines, and then finally they succumbed to the sword of Islam under the Mohammedans in the 6th and 7th century. Tough times. But the prophetic forward in this 13th and 14th verse speaks of refugees from the heathen nations. There's going to be refugees that are going to come from the nations fleeing this judgment. Because do you know how many people have tried to go over to Israel? They've tried to emigrate there. There are many people, even in the Hebrew Roots movement, that have gone over there, tried to start all kinds of ministries and whatnot. And they go under there and they hide their light under a basket. Because if they truly start speaking about their New Testament faith and their belief in Yahushua, they're done, they're out. There's many that have, like Ephraim, it says in the book of Yasha, they left the land, they left to go to the promised land too early. And what happens if you leave before the prophecy is ready? You will be destroyed. Zechariah tells us that the land needs to be cleansed first before we go back to it. So there's going to be a whole bunch of people that are going to be caught up in the cleansing of the land of Israel by fire. Zechariah tells us 2/3 are going to be destroyed by fire, and that's going to be the west coast from Tel Aviv, all the way forward. You see this in the scriptures, that this prophetic forward speaks of refugees from the heathen nations fleeing from Israel as this judgment of Zechariah 13:8 unravels, and two-thirds will be caught up in the fire, and then 1/3 will remain, and they will become refugees awaiting for what? What will they wait for? If the fire has come and there's 1/3 left, they're going to be refugees in a desolate land waiting for what? What does the Bible say? Waiting for the flame, the point, the saviors that will come from the nations. That's the believers in the Melchizedek Yahusha as high priest, who will go and establish biblical Israel in this world, because his kingdom is going to come. In fact, it's within us. So this is what we're waiting for in these days. You're going to see the saviors, Ephraim, the flame, which is the point, licking up that which remains in the land and bringing forth the final third prophecy of this book.
So the book of Obadiah is a powerful prophetic word. And if we go back to verse 8, it says, "In that day, declares Yahweh, I shall destroy the wise men from Edom and discernment from the mountains of Esau. And your mighty men shall be discouraged, O Teman, so that everyone from the mountains of Esau is cut off by killing. Because of your violence against your brother Jacob, let shame cover you, and you shall be cut off forever. In the day that you stood on the other side, in the day that strangers took captive his wealth, when foreigners entered his gates and cast lots for Jerusalem, you also were like one of them. And you should not have looked on your brother's day in the day of his estrangement, nor rejoiced over the children of Judah in the day of their destruction, nor made your mouth great in the day of distress, nor have entered the gate of my people in the day of their calamity, nor looked down on their evil in the day of their calamity, nor have seized their wealth in the day of their calamity, nor have stood at the parting of the way to cut off his fugitives, nor handed over his survivors in the day of distress."
Let's look at verse 15. For the Yom Yahweh, the day of Yahweh, is near upon all nations. Meaning the confederacies, all of these alliances that the fake Jews have made in the nations with the banks, with the cartels, are going to be exposed. What's going on in Hollywood is all part of the alliances and the confederacies being exposed. What's going on in Washington, D.C. with the political shakeup is these confederacies and alliances are being exposed. And if you follow the money, where does the money go? It always connects back to the Ashkenazi Rothschild banking system, which is Edom. Now, my wife told me after last week's part 1 teaching, says, I wasn't tracking with a lot of it. I was like, really? Yeah, I had to listen to it a couple of times. So it is a little bit, I hope that I'm not losing you. It's a lot to take in because we're going against the grain, kicking against the goats. Verse 15, for the day of Yahweh is near upon all the nations. As you have done, it shall be done to you. Your reward shall return upon your own head. Edom, whatever you did, you stole the identity of the Jews and you said that you were the Sephardim. So then you invited the Ashkenazi to come in and you made a confederacy with them. And then what did they do? They stole the identity of the Jews, and you have become their servants, the servant class in the state of Israel. Now, what has been done to you and what you've done to others is finally going to be done to you by the flame of Joseph, who is the rightful heirs to the name Israel and the land of Israel. If you have ears to hear and eyes to see, I hope you can see this, because this is huge. This is huge. Verse 16, for you have drunk upon my kadosh holy mountain. What? You remember Herod the Edomite? What was he involved in? He was allowing an illegitimate priesthood to run the sacrifices at the time of Yahushua, Caiaphas. So yes, you were involved in holy sacrifices that you, by you being involved in them, actually made them profane. Because the Edomites have no right to the priesthood. You can call it a Levitical priesthood. You can call it that, but John the Baptist knew better, didn't he? And he said, no, I will not have a part of that. I'm paraphrasing. He went out to the desert and he was the true high priest of the order of Aaron. And he was not involved in the corruption of the Edomites that was going up on the mount. So you have drunk upon a cup upon my holy mountain. So shall all the nations drink continually. Yes, they shall drink and they shall swallow down and they shall be as though they had not been. So this is talking about now this third cycle. What we are finding right now is Christian Zionism and the Hebrew roots messianic movement. They're both supporting the same end time goal. That is establishing the Ashkenazi Jews, which are not Jews, they're Edomites, to partake of the drink offerings up on the mountain. And what's going to happen if you align yourself with that altar? Hebrews says, if you align yourself with that altar, then you're despising the Son of Glory, and you have no right to eat of the altar of which we will eat, which is up where the disciples are buried, up on the Mount of Olives near the red heifer altar, on which Yahushua, who is the one that is taken from inside the gates, outside the gates, to cleanse everybody in the gates. If that doesn't blow your mind, then I don't know what is. This is the biggest thing, because you and I, it's happening all around us. And the deceptions, the end time game is establishing Edomites with drink offerings. Christian Zionism is going straight for it. The Messianic Hebrew Roots movement is going straight for it. And the Ashkenazi are chuckling behind the Talmud at your naivety. Absolute naivety. You think that you're going to be able to name the name of Yahushua or Jesus on that drink offering? There is no way. And that is what John Hagee, that is what the prominent teachers in the Hebrew Roots movement, they're all on the same bus to destruction. Because if you tie a string around it, either Yahushua is your high priest, or an Edomite is going to be your high priest. That's it. Tie a string around your end time theology. I know there's a lot of excuses right now. Oh, well, we know, yeah, we love the Torah, but we don't have to keep all of it because we can't, because we're not in the land, because of this excuse, that excuse, you know. But at the end of the day, all of those excuses are going to go away, and you're going to have to make a choice. And at the end of the day, you'll be so far down the road, you'll be like the Titanic right on top of an iceberg, and you won't be able to turn that ship around because you won't have the understanding. You'll just go straight in. And I'm telling you, I see it more and more. People are getting more and more entrenched in Zionism, Messianic, Judaism, and the Edomite conspiracy. And it is dangerous. Yahweh said the true Edomites have laid their hand on Israel's substance. What does that mean? What does that mean? They stole their identity. They stole their heritage. And they have entered into our gates. Our gates is the land of Israel that was promised to the sons of Joseph, given to them by deed, by an oath of swearing. Now, in my Bible, Jacob who is Israel, who gave the right to his name, he didn't lay his hand on Judah. He didn't lay his hand on Benjamin. He didn't lay his hand on Levi. And there's not one verse to support that. But teaching this is absolutely insulting to those that believe he laid his hands on Judah. He didn't. They have presented themselves, these Edomites, to be true Israel, even before the Ashkenazi did at the end of the 19th and beginning of the 20th century. The Edomites are the Jews known as Sephardim, or the Eastern Jew. Some say Sephardim means Spanish, or a Spanish Jew. Many will say, well, that really applies to the Jews who came from Spain. But these Eastern Jews were in the land long before any Spanish Jew arrived. That was quite some time later. So the Edomites have laid hands on Israel's substance. They've claimed it for themselves, and they are handing it on a silver platter over to the Ashkenazi. And they did that at the beginning of the 20th century. Israel's history and Israel's heritage is actually foretold by the prophet Obadiah. It's amazing if you can see what these scriptures really communicate.
So the verses he reviewed were about the day of Yahweh is near, and that's where we're at. We are the remnant generation of Israel. Verse 15, for the day of Yahweh is near upon all the nations, and you, as you have done, it shall be done to you. Your reward shall come back on your own head. For as you have drunk on my set apart mountain, so do all the nations drink continually. And they shall drink and shall swallow, and they shall be as though they had never been. But on Mount Zion there shall be an escape, and they shall be set apart, and the house of Jacob shall possess their possessions, and the house of Jacob shall be a fire. So the fire is synonymous with the house of Jacob. Keep that in mind. And the house of Joseph is synonymous with a flame. And the house of Jacob shall be a fire, and the house of Joseph a flame, but the house of Esau for stubble. Esau is synonymous with stubble. And they shall burn among them, and they shall consume them, so that no survivor is left of the house of Esau. For Yahweh has spoken. So Yahweh will pour out his spirit. And after this, it shall be that I pour out my spirit on all flesh, and your sons and your daughters shall prophesy, your old men dream dreams, your young men see visions, and also on the male servants and on the female servants I shall pour out my spirit in those days, and I shall give signs in the heavens and upon the earth, blood and fire and columns of smoke. The sun is turned into darkness and the moon into blood before the coming of the great and awesome day of Yahweh. And it shall be that everyone who calls on the name of Yahweh shall be delivered. For on Mount Zion and in Jerusalem there shall be an escape, as Yahweh has said, and among the survivors whom Yahweh calls.
Let's get ready. We'll go into verse 17. Because what you have to remember is, when the Ashkenazi came into the land at the beginning of the 20th century, they were only doing to Edom, the Sephardim, what Edom had done to the real Jews centuries earlier. Yahweh said right here, what Edom has done shall be returned upon them, right? What did they do? Well, they came into Israel during the exile by the Romans, took full possession of it, and presented themselves to be the true Israel. But in 1948, the Ashkenazi European Jew did the very same thing to Edom. They came into the land, they took Edom's possessions, and they presented themselves to be Israel, just as Edom has done. They're still having fights in Israel over vineyards, olive groves, and acreage that they stole back in the 40s. And it is what was done to them has now been returned upon their head. This is why some Israelites believe the Ashkenazi are Edomites, because they have the spirit of Edom upon them. The same thing Edom did to Israel was done unto them. So the Sephardic Jews today, they're hated by the Ashkenazi Jews. They're oppressed. But this was supposed to happen because it's prophecy being fulfilled. Verse 17, but upon Mount Zion shall be deliverance, and there shall be set apartness, and the house of Jacob shall possess their possessions, and those who possess them. So the self-titled Jews that were abundant in Western Europe before World War II were actually descendants from the Canaanites. They were from Gopher. They were from Gomer. Gopher. Did I say Gopher? They are. They're like gophers, aren't they? They kind of wiggle and burrow around. Blooming gophers. From Gomer, they were from Gomer. They were from Togarmah, which connects us back, of course, to Ashkenaz, little gophers. So now I'll get done and pinged for saying that. Well, that's racist. So anyway, they're not Shemites at all. The ruling elements that actually infiltrated Rome and then later Germany, they were descendants of Esau. The financiers, the bankers, they were the descendants of Esau. They infiltrated Rome. They infiltrated the aristocracy within Jerusalem. They infiltrated Gaul and Germany. You have to think about this. I mean, my mind is just spinning when I think about the history and the biblical text, because what group has proven itself capable of defeating the West in the 100-year war? What group? What group has eroded the Western structure of civilization in the 100-year war? And many of you would be like, well, what do you mean the 100-year war? Well, we're in 2018, and the 100-year war began in 1917 with the Bolshevik Revolution. The Bolsheviks, the Ashkenazi, started to erode the Western Hemisphere and infiltrate and push into the West. And they had a 100-year plan, which has just come into its full fruition, of eroding the morals and decadency of the West by infiltrating it with financial corruption, lewdness in the filmmaking industry. That's what they were trying to cleanse in Berlin in the 1920s. It was filthy over there. And that's what they've done. They've infected the mind of our culture so that we've got no morals, we've got no integrity, and our financial banking structure is totally broke, because they've infiltrated every sect of society and actually caused rot within it. That was the 100-year plan. And then they bring in the Arabs. Remember, Esau, Edom is Mount Seir, and they bring in the Arabs to cause what? Mayhem, destruction, and to then get the nations to become financially dependent upon Edom, because now they need financing for all of their wars, security, and protection from terrorism. So this is the plan, and we can see this. The Arabs are just a tool that Edom uses to bring about the mutual destruction of the nations in this 100-year plan. And some of you are like, what? But anyway, let me go through, because I'm going to be able to show you this all through the Bible text. So, as I was saying, what group has proven itself capable of defeating the West in the 100-year plan? None other than the Ashkenazi, because they infiltrated the highest positions of financials within, whether it was the Reichsbank in Germany, the Bank of England, or Wall Street. Think about it. After World War I and the Germans came underneath the heavy yoke of the Versailles Treaty, the German mark's dramatic devaluation began when? I mean, you would have to have a barrel full of German marks to buy a loaf of bread. And then by the end of the day, you'd need 2 wheelbarrow fulls of German marks to buy a loaf of bread. Because by the end of the day, inflation had caused such an effect. And how did that happen? That happened soon after the Riďqah was privatized. Well, what do you mean? Because of the crippling effect of the Versailles Treaty, the Germans privatized the Riďqah. And who were the people that had the money to buy the bank? The Ashkenazi Bolsheviks. And this was back in 1718. So they privatized the Riďqah, the Bolsheviks buy the bank, and you've got all these Bolshevik private investors that are now in charge of the currency. So they cause huge inflation that causes the German people to do what? Be evicted from their houses that the Riďqah now owned. And then they had to sell their possessions, their fine art, and who had the money to buy it? Connect the dots, because you'll all sit around and watch Schindler's List, and you'll think that it's historical truth, when in reality, it's a work of fiction that Hollywood has presented to the world as truth. And everyone's like, oh, did you watch Schindler's List? It's not a true story. And people really think it's true. It's a work of fiction with elements of truth in it. But it's a work of fiction. But people today, that's their true history. We've been sold down the river by the Edomites. And the prophet Obadiah is laying it all out for us in this third and final cycle. So, I mean, think about it. Think about the Federal Reserve. 1910. What happened with the Federal Reserve in 1910? Well, they decide to go on holiday to Jekyll Island. And they created the Federal Reserve at Jekyll Island. That was in 1910. The Federal Reserve, you'll go, well, what's wrong with that? Who owns the Federal Reserve? The Laser brothers, Israel Moses, Kuhn Loeb, Wahlberg, the Lehman brothers, Goldman Sachs, and Rothschild. That's who owns the private Federal Reserve. And you know what? This happened back at the turn of the 20th century. And we're still trying to catch up from the last great president that we had. And that last great president, on June the 4th, 1963, he said, you know what? We're done with this. And he signed an executive order June 4th, 1963, and he said, no, we are not going to go through the Federal Reserve to print money anymore. We're going to bypass the private Federal Reserve that's owned by these Ashkenazis, June 4th, 1963, and by his executive order, he said, no, we're actually going to go, as the Constitution of these great United States says, we're going to print the money by constitutional right through the Treasury. And within 6 months, he's got a bullet in his head, or 3, depending on what conspiracy or line you want to buy. And we're trying to get back to that kind of leadership. Wow. And I didn't even grow up over here. And you've got people that have been here for 60 years, 70 years that are still like, ooh. Right? That's because yes, thank you. That's because now you can smoke weed everywhere, right? So why think? Right? Exactly. They don't want you to think. Get stoned instead. My goodness. gracious me. I'm only in verse 18, but we've only got a few verses to go, 21. But Yahweh says that just as Edom is drunk upon his mountain, the land, so shall the heathen come and drink and swallow down, and Edom shall be as though they had not been. So the heathen shall come in and take over, leaving Edom so far behind that it'll be as if they never ever existed. This is the exact situation that we see that is occurring today. True Edom is so far behind, they're actually hidden from the geopolitical landscape. You can't find them. Do you see the Sephardic involved in finance? Do you see the Sephardic involved? No, they've been taken over. They're so far hidden under the boot of the Ashkenazi. This is exactly what would happen. How many people have made the connection of Edom being the Sephardic Jew in alliance with the Ashkenazi? There's not many people that have made that connection out there. Because if you start making those connections, then you start getting called name. It's called the culture of shut up. If you call me enough names, then maybe you'll get me to be quiet. But it actually doesn't work. As I said with me, I just keep on going, and then the voice gets louder and louder. But, the Sephardic Jew is almost lost in history, but Yahweh says that this is all supposed to happen. Because in verse 17, Yahweh says Israel will possess its possessions once again. Biblical Israel will make it back into the land. History and heritage will come back. Just as we plundered Egypt, we will plunder the nations, Joseph, and we will be the flame that will return back into the land. Because Egypt has actually been constructed by the Ashkenazi. Our whole system, our whole mortgage system, our whole banking system, it's all a construction of Edom. Those that have stolen the identity. And this is the world that you and I have been born into. And this is the reason that the Ashkenazi are actually in the land of Israel today. They have to be. They have to return to Edom, to the land of Israel, so that the reward will return upon their own head. As Edom came into the land and took Israel's substance and heritage, the Ashkenazi came in and did the same thing to Edom. They're actually fulfilling another prophecy. So the Ashkenazi are supposed to be in the land of Israel, not as Israelites, but as Gentiles, and to return Edom's deed upon their own head, which will in turn be returned on their head when Israel becomes a fire and Joseph returns as a flame to lick up the substance. And this is where we're at. Verse 18. And the house of Jacob shall be a fire, and the house of Joseph the flame, and the house of Esau shall become stubble. And they shall kindle them and devour them, and there shall not be any remaining of the house of Esau, for Yahweh has spoken it. And they of the south shall possess the mountains of Esau, and they of the plains the Plishtim, and they shall possess the fields of Ephraim and the fields of Shomron, and Benjamin shall possess Gilead. Verse 20. And the captivity of this host, the host of the children of Israel, shall possess that of the Canaanites, even to Zarphat, and the captivity of Jerusalem, which is in Sephard, shall possess the cities of the south. A lot of information in those last verses that we don't want to gloss over. Canaanites means Germany, where the majority of Ashkenazi actually settled, because Zarephath means France and Britain, and Sephard means Spain. But the book of Obadiah ends in this next verse with what's called the comforting of Zion, and the sons of Joseph eventually coming in as that flame and destroying Edom. And the house of Jacob shall be fire, and the house of Joseph a flame, and the house of Esau stubble. And they shall kindle them and devour them, and there shall not be any remaining of the house of Esau, for Yahweh hath spoken it. This is the confrontation between Joseph and Esau right from the biblical text. Think about it. Jacob, he fled to Laban, right? And what does Laban mean? Laban means milky white, like an albino, right? Laban was, of course, his mother's brother, and then he married two sisters. They were daughters of Laban. And they're two maidservants, and they had what? 11 sons. We know the story. We know the biblical account. Benjamin, though, his 12th son, was born much later. And upon the birth of Joseph, his 11th son, Jacob decided to do what? What did Jacob decide to do? But he only decided to do it once Joseph was born. Huh? Go back to the land. What? Once Joseph is born, recognized and established and brought forth in the end times, that's when we go back to the land. So this message that is being communicated is a very important message in waking up and birthing Joseph so that Jacob Israel will go back into the land. Even the sages have said for over 2,000 years that after the birth of Joseph, Jacob no longer feared Esau. Once Joseph comes up and wakes up and actually has the courage to teach this, to communicate this, and expose the Ashkenazi Edomite confederacy, Joseph will awaken as a multitude in the nations, and no longer will Israel be afraid and in hiding, but will go back into the land. Jacob Israel no longer feared Esau, since he knew that Joseph and Joseph alone was capable of and destined to defeat Esau. Wow. Genesis 30, verse 25. And it came to pass, when Rachel had borne Joseph, that Jacob said unto Laban, send me away, that I may go back to my own land and to my country of inhabitants. Selah. What a difference the birth of Joseph makes. That's why I am so convinced that we must communicate this awakening of the Melchizedek priesthood to Joseph in the nations. Obadiah 1:18 again tells us of this fire and this flame. And then Obadiah concludes, and the captivity of this host of the children of Israel shall possess of the Canaanites, even to Zarephath. The captivity of Jerusalem, which is in Sephard, shall possess the cities in the south. And saviors, that's the Melchizedek priesthood of Joseph, the flame licking up the substance after Israel is caught afire, with 2/3 of it being wiped out and 1/3 remaining in poverty, awaiting the spearhead to come. Those saviors shall come upon Mount Zion to judge the mount of Esau, and the kingdoms shall be Yahweh's.
Powerful, powerful. And so he reviewed all of the verses on the screen before you. And he brought out in verse 21, and saviors, or that's meaning, and the sons of Joseph shall come to Mount Zion to judge the mountains of Esau, and the reign shall belong to Yahweh. And then he also broke down in verse 20, he associated the Canaanites with Germany, Zarephath with France and Britain, and Sephard with Spain. So that's helpful to us to kind of connect things to our day and age. And it does take courage. It does take courage to teach this background. It's not always, it really is not an enjoyable topic to teach. It really is not. It actually takes courage, because his word is sharper than any two-edged sword. And we have to be very careful on how we use the sword of his word. But at the same time, this is coming from him. This prophecy is coming from him to alert his people of the deceptions of this fallen world. And it's our responsibility, not that we always like what our responsibility is, but it's our responsibility to alert his people, or their blood will be on our hands.
We will come upon what they call the Temple Mount, and we will judge it. This is not the Temple Mount. This is the Roman Antonia fortress. And the Kotel, the Western Wall, that is the foundational wall to a Roman fortress that housed 10,000 Roman soldiers caught up in carnality. But if you want to travel 600 feet further south, down into the city of David, that is where the true temple will be built. And it is a temple that will be administered under the Melchizedek high priest, Yahushua our Messiah, once he sets his feet down and splits the Mount of Olives. This is the real biblical prophecy of truth, not the phony Zionism that they are teaching today. Not the phony Zionism. Zarephath was the name of a township actually on the coast of Lebanon. Zarephath, look at that verse, the last few verses there. Zarephath actually belonged to Zidon. Zidon, you can find that in 1 Kings 17:9. Zarephath was also the name in later Hebrew for France. For France. And its neighboring Zarephath is mentioned in the book of Obadiah here in the 20th verse in connection with the exile of where Joseph went. Joseph isn't limited just to America, but all through the nations. The captivity of their host of the children of Israel shall possess that of the Canaanites all the way up to France, Zarephath. That's the first exile, or the exile of the 10 tribes, commonly called the lost 10 tribes, who reach from the land of the Canaanites, Germany, to Zarephath, which is France, and eventually into Britain. Britain meaning in Hebrew, Brit, Am, the covenant people, or the Anglo-Saxon sons of Isaac. It's amazing stuff. The Hebrew word hail, translated in the King James as host, can also mean first, and most old Jewish commentaries will actually understand this verse to refer to the first exile, meaning that of the 10 northern tribes taken into exile by the Assyrians. But they also tended to understand the place named Zarephath in this case as referring to France and its area to France and England together, and thus either expressly or by implication, the 10 northern tribes made it as far as the British Isles. And Stephen Collins does an excellent job on the migration of the tribes, way better than I could ever do. So if you want to look into the migration of the tribes, check out Stephen Collins' great work there. But Obadiah, he prophesied about the eventual destruction of Edom as a distinct nation, even though the Edomite, are you following me? I'm looking at my wife right here, because are you? You seem to be glazed over. Are we going to have to talk about this? This is what I'm going to be doing tonight. She's going to be, now, can you tell me that one again? She was like, I'm so excited about your teaching today. I was like, really? She's like, oh, I'm so excited. You're going to be teaching this and that. I said, no, that's next week. I'm doing Obadiah part 2 today. She's like, oh. She said, oh, okay. It's a tough audience when you've got the missus sitting up front. It's a tough audience, I tell you. But Obadiah does he really does. He really does, honey. He does prophesy the destruction of Edom as a distinct nation, even though the Edomites could and would survive as citizens, even in other countries, because Edom will be punished. Unless what? Obadiah was an Edomite, unless they repented. You can always repent. You can always repent. Do you know how many times I've had to repent publicly for teaching something that I later found out was in error? I don't understand teachers, and they just get more stubborn and more stubborn. Don't you realize if you repent, then Yahweh will elevate and bring you into another season of greatness? You just admit your mistakes. You're human. I used to teach I have a teaching back in Calvary Chapel. I still have the cassette where I was teaching on the 10 Commandments. And I said this, well, of course, you can't keep the Sabbath. I actually taught that. And, once every 15 years, I'll replay that, if you can find a tape recorder anywhere and just, but humble roots, right? But I had to repent of that. And that's when they kicked me out. But, it brought me into a new season of keeping Shabbat and teaching the Shabbat. So anyway, be that as it may, Edom are a small percentage that moved in when the Romans came, and they aided in the expulsion, first of the royal Negro class of Jews, and later the conversion of the poorer Fehalim, the worker class of Jews. Basically, they stole the Jews' identity and they said, we are the Sephardics. We are the Sephardics. That happened after the turn of the Romans. Then in 1948, it turned on their head because they made an alliance with the Ashkenazi, thinking we'll get all this help. But then the Ashkenazi totally took over, and the Sephardics have what? Disappeared. Really, they're a very, very oppressed class of Jews. It was done unto them. So if we accept the given identification of Edom and that Joseph is destined to defeat Edom, then it stands to reason that Joseph must be found amongst a people with proven ability to defeat Edom. Who are the people? Who are the people? The lost 10 tribes were in Zarephath, which in modern Hebrew means France, but in biblical terms was understood to mean both France and the area to its north, the Isles of Britain. Only when Joseph, only when Joseph, scattered in the nations, awakes to this confederacy, this Edomite conspiracy, where the Edomites betrayed and stole the true Jews' identity, becoming the Middle Eastern Sephardics, who in turn made a confederacy with the Gentiles, the Ashkenazi Khazars, who in turn then stole their identity. Are you tracking this? Yeah, I had to literally table it out. Because I'm reading all this history, I'm like, okay, I got this straight. You really have to, and then I'm reading the Bible again and again and again, and finally it all starts to lock in. So I don't expect you, Tamara, it's just like, oh yes, perfect, yes, figured that one out. You have to let this marinate, sit on it, pray about it, look at the scriptures. But at the end of the day, these Ashkenazi Khazars made a confederacy with those that were there before, the Sephardics. They all, both of them, stole the identity of the true Jews. And now their job is doing what? Fomenting strife by using Mount Seir, or Arabah, the valley of Arabah, the feminine for Arab. They're using the Arabs to foment terror amongst the Western nations, to destabilize them so they go to war with the Arabah, having to get financing from the Ashkenazi, so the Ashkenazi get more powerful as the nations become destabilized. You understand why Great Britain is not great anymore? You understand why Great Britain gave back India? Because we were broke. America just, in the past few years, finally paid off their debt to the bankers from World War II. They just finally paid off their debt. So this is all what it's about. We've got to get into another war, right? For the Ashkenazi to continue to destabilize and cripple the nations, we've got to get into another war. Let's use the Valley of Riďqah, the Arabs, to bring about the corrosion and wearing down of the West. It's a simple ploy, and it has been developed. You know, chess was actually developed in Persia. I mean, it's a Middle Eastern game. Where do you think it's chess. Who can outmaneuver and give you some ploys? And we're using the pawns, the Arabs, to get the work done. It's chess. That's what it is. So as we find this coming and awakening in these days, it's really time for people, whether it's in America or Europe, to wake up. We need to wake up to how the Ashkenazi and Edom are using the Arabs in this end time geopolitical battle. I mean, we look right here in the biblical text, and we make the connection with France, we make the connection with Britain, we use and look at the Valley of Riďqah, which is the feminine for Arab, and we make these connections. And then I look back in history. Remember the Battle of the Tours? The Battle of the Tours was when the French turned back the invading Mohammedans. The Mohammedans, Islam, the Arabs, they got within 150 miles of Paris. I mean, they were 150 miles outside of Paris, and finally, the French woke up and they secured Europe. And they actually secured Europe from Islam for 700 years, until the fall of Constantinople, when the Muslims breached the Eastern Gateway, when they overran Constantinople in 1453, I think it was. I mean, and now we're seeing this all again. And then people don't even realize, coming from England, that the Muslims even went all the way up and took over an island in England. That happened, when was that? That was in the 1609, because England actually was at war with the Barbary Muslims. The first war the Americans ever had was with the Barbary Muslims, the Barbary pirates. But the Barbary pirates, they went up the coast of England and they took over Bristol. They actually took over an island in the city of Bristol called Lundy Island. And why were they doing that? Because the Islamics, they were trying to take the British, the white British, as slaves. They were the biggest slavers. Islam was the biggest slavers, of course, So they went all the way up to England in 1609, the Barbary Muslim pirates, and they occupied Lundy Island, which was right outside the city of Bristol. I mean, this is crazy stuff. Now, if you go to Bristol today, it's totally Islamified. There's mosques everywhere. You don't want to go to Bristol. You certainly don't want to go to Birmingham. No offense if you're in Birmingham or Bristol, but you might want to think about moving to Scotland or something. Crazy stuff. So all of this is just telling us that Obadiah, the prophecy of Obadiah, is communicating that the Edomites are using the Arabs as a tool to destabilize the West, and that we should awake to this duplicity. Because when we awake to the duplicity, we'll no longer get involved in these useless wars, because these wars are used to fund Edom. And it's a deception that our state and our world is in today. But how the Arabs are used to wear down the nations and indebt themselves to Edom and finance more wars is a terrible thing. If you look at the big banks today, whether it's the Deutsche Bundesbank in Germany, whether it's the European Central Bank, or the Bank of England or Wall Street. These are all owned by the Edomites, all of them. So this confederacy and this alliance is exposed. But now I want to just conclude and switch gears, because there's a lot of history, there's a lot to take in. But at the end of the day, you and I may see this confederacy. We may expose this confederacy on a geopolitical level. We can see it now in the Bible. But what I'm concerned about is being ready and prepared. Because Yahushua said to us at the end of the day, yes, we can do this, we can travel here, we can travel there. But at the end of the day, we need to clean the inside of the cup. And I look at my life and I go, okay, where have I made confederacies in my life? Where have I made alliances? Think about this. I mean, have I made alliances? I mean, at some point we made alliances and confederacies with sin, did we not? And Yahweh demands that we forsake those confederacies. In John chapter 4, it says confederacies with, James chapter 4, verse 4. Confederacies with the world make us what? Make us Edomites. Confederacies with the world, James 4, verse 4, they make us Edomites. If you love the world, you're an enemy, an Edomite of Elohim. So we cannot love the world. And I look and I go, I see so many people that have made confederacies and alliances. You may have made a confederacy and alliance with your doctor and decided you're going to vaccinate all your children. Well, you might want to question those kind of confederacies and alliances, because in the end, it'll all come down on your next generation's head. You may have made confederacies and alliances in your marriage. You may have compromised with a husband. You may have compromised with a wife and made a confederacy. And eventually, it's going to come down double upon your head. At some point, you have to, and wives and husbands are looking like this, and I'm talking like this with my eyes closed. I am not looking at anyone. But I'm saying, I have to look at these. What confederacies and alliances have I made? Have you made? That is what Obadiah is truly calling us to do. Because then we'll have the eyes to see and the clarity and the sanctification so that we can see this war coming. Because if we're soiled and our garments are soiled, we're going to be so disinformed. We're not going to have the eyes to see, because sanctification brings forth revelation. Confederacies bring blindness and darkness. We can't pretend to be something that we're not. We can't make confederacies with the world. We can't make confederacies and alliances with sin. We need to be transparent. And many of you will go, oh, well, I've lost friends. Yes, but you'll gain a family. You'll become the house of Joseph. I mean, I've lost so many friends along the way that I thought would come along for the journey. But no, they wouldn't. So you let those confederacies and alliances go for truth and for righteousness. I made a confederacy and an alliance with Christmas. I let it go. I made a transference of that and an alliance and a confederacy with Hanukkah and Purim, and I let them go, because I found that these are nothing more than confederacies of man. We make confederacies all over the time. Maybe you made a confederacy with your eyes and you're looking at something you shouldn't be looking at. Well, be like Job and make a confederacy with your eyes unto Yahweh. Make a confederacy with your tongue and your ears. What kind of confederacy have you made with the movies that you bring into your house? I've made a confederacy with my wife that I will not choose movies. Because when I was a kid, 11 years old, my mum gave me a video card. And I was allowed to go down the video store at 11 years old with my 7-year-old brothers and rent anything. That wasn't good. So Matthew cannot be trusted with renting movies. Because I'll be like, oh, it looks like a great action movie. And the next thing you know, because I wanted to see some machine guns, you've had to listen to F-bombs and all kinds of stuff. So I gave that up. I'm like, you go choose the stuff, because I'm not doing it. So that's a confederacy me and my wife have made together to protect our house. We all have to do that. This is what the prophet requires of us, to take it to the next level of discernment. Shut up, Matthew. But there's a lot to think about, isn't there? There's a lot to think about. I take away from this truly the duplicity, the alliances, and the confederacies, not only on a biblical level with the geopolitics and exposing those who say they are Jews that are not, but are in fact the synagogue of Satan. But then I take it to a personal level, and I look at my life, and I look at those around me, and I go, no, okay, where in my life have I made alliances and confederacies? And they may have just snuck up on you. They may have snuck up on you. And then you've got to go, no. And then we do the deep work. And then we'll see this even more clearly. So this was a great thing. And this was all birthed out of the embassy being moved to Jerusalem a few weeks ago. And look where it took us. But I hope it was a blessing. It was a blessing for me, for sure. Questions, comments, anybody? Yes.
This conspiracy, and I call it conspiracy, how many of the
Oh, you're on.
how many of the individuals that are being used in this know what they're doing?
Well, I think on the higher levels, when you're talking about the financiers and the politicians, oh yeah, very much so. I think it's just a question of the people down. It's really the Nicolaitan pyramid system. Those at the top have the understanding and the illumination, the enlightenment. They get to see everything. And those on the lower tiers of the pyramid, they're the slave class that don't get to see. And that's really how the Ashkenazi has become so powerful, is illumination, which is from the Luciferic realm, and then making a slave class that supports it underneath through interest and loans, which has, been going on for thousands of years. They were kicked out of England for that very purpose. So, yeah, questions in the back, anyone at all? No? So anyway, tough stuff, but I hope we can marinate it and see, and then have eyes to see as things become unfolded in this nation with the Hollywood, with the FBI, with Wall Street, and the presidency right now, as people are truly, truly questioning the confederacies. I mean, even Donald Trump, he's like, well, he's even hired his own security team because he's not making a confederacy with the Secret Service, because they made a confederacy with Obama. They're all sold out. So this is all starting to come unfold, and that's why you're seeing these big, big politicians going to jail or being stripped because of this time that we're in, this third wheel of exposure. So Father, we pray and we thank you for this time. We thank you, Abba, for your word, and we thank you for the words of the prophet Obadiah. May we speedily, Abba, expect your day to come and the return of the house of Joseph from the nations, a flame to lick up the fire and to begin this final phase as the establishment of biblical Israel comes about through the redemptive work of your Son, Yahusha, our high priest. Amen. Amen. All right.
When Yah wants to bless you, he sends people. When the devil wants to destroy you, he sends people. In Joel chapter 2, it says, blow a shofar in Zion and sound an alarm in my set apart mountain. Let all the inhabitants of the earth tremble, for the day of Yahweh is coming, for it is near. A day of darkness and gloom, a day of clouds and thick darkness, like the morning clouds spread over the mountains, a people many and strong, the like of whom has never been, nor shall there ever be again after them to the years of many generations. Toldot. Ahead of them, a fire has consumed. Now we know that is Israel. Ahead of them, a fire, Israel is a fire, has consumed. And behind them, a flame. And we know flame is synonymous with Joseph. And behind them, a flame burns. Before them, the land is like the Garden of Eden, and behind them, a desert waste. And from them, there is no escape. Their appearance is like the appearance of horses, and they run like steeds, as the noise of chariots that leap over mountain tops, as the noise of a flaming fire consuming stubble, as a mighty people set in battle array. Before them, peoples are in anguish. All faces become flushed. They run like mighty men. They climb the wall like men of battle. Everyone goes on his way, and they do not break ranks, and they do not press one another. Everyone goes in his path. They fall among the weapons, but they do not stop. They rush on the city. They run on the wall. They climb into the houses. They enter at the windows like a thief. The earth shall tremble before them. The heavens shall shake. Sun and moon shall be darkened, and the stars withdraw their brightness. And Yahweh shall give forth his voice before his army. And Yahweh shall give forth his voice before his army. For his camp is very great. For mighty is the doer of his word. For the day of Yahweh is great and very awesome, and who does bear it? And in Revelation, it talked about in verse 14, and the armies in the heaven, dressed in fine linen, white and clean, follow him on what? Follow him on white horses. The Lamb and the 144,000. And I looked and saw a lamb standing on Mount Zion, and with him 144,000, having his father's name written upon their foreheads. And some texts say his name and his father's name. And I heard a voice out of the heaven, like the voice of many waters, and like the voice of loud thunder. And I heard the sound of harpists playing their harps. And they sang a new song before the throne and before the four living creatures and the elders. And no one was able to learn that song except the 144,000 who were redeemed from the earth. 1 Peter 2:4, drawing near to him a living stone, rejected indeed by men, but chosen by Elohim and precious. You also, as living stones, are being built up a spiritual house, a set-apart priesthood to offer up spiritual slaughter offerings acceptable to Elohim through Yahushua HaMashiach. I wanted us to listen to this brief clip about pure light, because we know that Yahushua is the way, the truth, and the life, but he is also the light of this world. And we know Satan emits false light because Satan counterfeits everything. This was done by I believe the Alpha Omega Productions.
New Jerusalem, it said, is built, made up of 12 precious stones that we would make into jewelry now. Now, here's the fascinating thing, which to me is the final proof that that book is the Word of God, that it must be God-inspired. In the last generation only, we've discovered how to make purer light than we had before. Most light is bouncing around, waves crashing into each other, going in all directions, so that the light coming from that spotlight still lights this side of my face by reflecting off that tinsel up there. We're used to light coming at us from all directions. But we've now discovered how to send light in one direction. Laser light is the most common. You've seen laser light beams straight as a die. But we've also got what we call cross-polarized light. A polarized filter, if you can imagine, allows light through like that. But if you put another polarized filter at right angles to that, you've really got a very fine filter. If you take sunglasses and take one lens and put it at right angles to the other, it goes even darker. It only lets very straight light through. Now, people have taken jewels and precious stones and cut a very thin slice for microscopic purposes, and then shone cross-polarized light through them to see what happens. To put it very crudely, what happens to these precious stones in pure light? And one of two entirely different things happens with every jewel. The technical term, to give you a bit of science for a moment, is anisotropic jewels and isotropic jewels. Now, what happens is this. Some jewels in pure light, whatever their color to begin with, they may be red, blue, or green, turn into all the colors of the rainbow and the most fantastic patterns. Other precious stones in pure light lose all their color, just go black, look like a lump of coal dust. And it's only in this generation that people have discovered this unusual property. For example, diamonds in pure light are nothing.
Did you get that, ladies?
They're not
Did you
even
hear that. Diamonds, nothing. They won't be there.
No, so make the most of them here. Rubies, garnets, just lose everything.
Emeralds.
No, they keep it.
Oh, good.
There are other stones that are anisotropic and go into these beautiful colors. Now, here's the fascinating thing. The 12 precious stones that God uses to build the New Jerusalem are all anisotropic. In pure light, they are all far more beautiful. And God doesn't touch the diamonds or the rubies. He doesn't build with them.
Staggering.
Now, let's just put on the screen a picture of these stones.
Yeah.
Look at the top 12 stones on this picture, and you'll see the stones of the New Jerusalem. Look at the 4 bottom ones at the bottom of the picture, and you'll see they're black, no attraction, whatever. Now then, who knew this 2,000 years ago? No scientist knew it. Nobody knew it. John the Apostle, writing down the book of Revelation as the Lord dictated it to him, he didn't know. Nobody knew except one person in the entire universe, and he knew, and that was God himself.
Where is that written exactly?
Revelation 21,
Right.
halfway through, and you'll find all the 12 stones listed there. And you can just imagine from the picture we've seen on the screen how beautiful the New Jerusalem is going to be. No need for do-it-yourself decoration or changing rooms there. No need. The materials that God uses will be fabulous.
From verse 19,
That's
21
right.
verse 19.
Read them out.
The first foundation was jasper,
Yeah?
the second sapphire, the third chalcedony, the fourth emerald, the fifth sardonyx, the sixth carnelian, the seventh chrysolite, the eighth beryl, the ninth topaz, the 10th chrysoprase, the 11th jacinth, and the 12th amethyst.
No diamonds, no rubies, no garnets, because they're isotropic. Now, isn't that amazing? To me, that one thing alone would prove that the Bible was inspired by God, because nobody could have known this. They didn't know it until our generation. But there it is.
Be not deceived in your Toldot generation. And lastly, Malachi 1:1 through 1:5, the message of the word of Yahweh to Israel by Malachi. I have loved you, said Yahweh, but you asked, in what way have you loved us? Was not Esau Jacob's brother, declares Yahweh? And I loved Jacob, but I have hated Esau, and have laid waste his mountains and his inheritance for the jackals of the wilderness. If Edom says, we have been beaten down, let us return and build the ruins, Yahweh of hosts said thus, let them build, but I tear down. And they shall be called border of wrongness, and the people against whom Yahweh is enraged forever. And your eyes shall see, and you shall say, great is Yahweh beyond the border of Israel. 2 nations warred in Riďqah's womb. One would possess the covenant lineage of righteousness, and the other would be known as the border of wrongness. We close now and we pray on this Shabbat. Dear Heavenly Father, give your people ears to hear and eyes to see. This is a hard message to understand because of all the lies that surround us in this fallen world. This is not a message to repel people from you. It's a message to attract people to you, attract people to the truth, and dispel the darkness of deception and lies. We give you all praise and glory this Shabbat. In the name of Yahushua HaMashiach, let it be so.